took seats off the Supreme Court. It subtracted 3 justices from the Supreme Court so that Andrew Johnson could not make any appointments. Andrew Johnson leaves office, Ulysses S. Grant fills the White House, and guess what happens then? Congress adds those seats back. It brings the number back to 9, and it has stayed at 9 ever since. Okay, but it has not stayed at 9 because the Constitution says so. It has stayed at 9 because Congress has said so. And all Congress has to do to change that number is pass a law by majority vote, signed by the president, that says we are adding seats. That's it. No one seriously doubts the constitutionality of that.
So we know that it's lawful for Democrats to expand the court should they have the numbers after the election. Is it popular? You know, FDR tried to expand the court when he was president, and Democratic and Republican lawmakers opposed it. The public hated this idea. What do we know about what Americans think of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's obviously true that FDR tried and failed to expand the court and that it was super unpopular. And historians have debated the reason for that failure for a really long time. I think the consensus is that one huge error was concealing his real goal. Okay, he didn't come out and say, we need to add justices because the current court is destroying the New Deal and destroying all federal laws that help poor people. He pretended like the justices were too old and that they were basically senile and that he had to sort of save them from themselves by adding more. And it rested on some very stupid lies. If we try to expand the court today, if Democrats come out and say we need to add seats, they've got to do it honestly, and they've got to explain squarely to the American people what the threat is and why they feel an obligation to contract with it. I do not know how well that will cope. I can tell you right now that a sizable majority of Americans, including many Republicans and independents, do not think that Trump should be able to fill Justice Ginsburg's seat, right? So we already have a huge portion of the country saying the next president or whoever wins in November should fill this seat. I think a lot of those people are going to be radicalized if Trump fills the seat anyway. And they're going to say, this is illegitimate. The Democrats need to do something as a kind of tit for tat just to restore some kind of balance in the court. The preliminary polling on court packing shows that it is not yet in favor, it does not yet have the favor of a majority of Americans. Like, we just have to be honest, it is not yet the most popular idea in the country. But I think that the sentiment is changing every day, and I think it's moving very quickly toward court expansion.
You're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Sam Sanders, talking with Mark Joseph Stern. He covers the Supreme Court. I'm not sure how to best word this question. It's perhaps a more philosophical rumination. But I find myself as allegedly, stone-faced, hard-nosed journalist, when I'm thinking about the court and reading these stories, I am falling into this mythology that the court should be above politics, and it is somehow more sacred than the rest of D.C., and that it is veneer, it's extra special and like above the fold. And for whatever reason, that number 9 justices, feels sacred as well. Why do you think I feel this way? And do you think Americans still have this strange belief in what's the best word for it? The sacred nature of the court.
Yeah, Americans, by and large, do seem to have that belief. And if you look at how the court was polling in its most recent term, a pretty big majority of Americans said they approved of the court and that they viewed it as basically above politics. I think there are a couple of reasons for that. First, I think that the median justice for a long time has been kind of center-right and has generally given both sides enough victories to make them feel satisfied. So there's just been this kind of balance that for a casual observer makes the court feel fair-minded and nonpartisan. I also think that there's just the trappings of the court the big marble palace that they work in, the beautiful red velvet curtain, the robes that they go into.
Beautiful gowns.
They are wizards, right? These people are wizards. They are wizards among men, and they do a really good job presenting themselves as wizards who do not engage in partisan squabbling. And, people laughed a lot about the notorious flush, right? We all heard a toilet flush when the Supreme Court shifted to arguments over the phone. I don't think that John Roberts laughed at that at all. I think John Roberts probably saw that as a pretty serious threat to the court's public image, because we are not supposed to think about the justices' bowel movements. Okay, we are not
also,
even.
no one snitched. Everything snitched on the other one. There's a loyalty among that man.
Oh, absolutely. And we are not even supposed to consider the possibility that the Supreme Court justices poop. Okay, that is just, I really do believe that when we turn on the TV and see senators screaming at each other, and then we tune into oral arguments and listen to fairly reasonable and dispassionate debate, we see a real difference. And we think these senators are driven by politics, and these judges are driven by something else. They are doing something different from politics that we have decided to call it.
But what I hear you say in other parts of the interview is that the Supreme Court has kind of always been political?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
From the very start.
Okay.
And, I don't think that any fair-minded observer of the court can debate that. I think what we could say is that there are instances in which the Supreme Court has risen above politics. I'm thinking of the decision forcing Nixon to hand over the White House tapes, right? Where you do see justices shed their partisan allegiances. But I think that in super high-profile cases, that is the exception and not the norm. And if you go back to pretty much the very beginning, a lot of these early Supreme Court cases involved petty partisan squabbles between presidents and Congress or members of the executive branch, and the Supreme Court kind of intervened and just decided that the outcome would be the one that they preferred, not just as judges, but as partisans. And that is how the Supreme Court has functioned most of the time throughout American history, and we just aren't taught that in school because I think it makes a lot of people feel besides.
It makes me feel sad. I'm thinking about Schoolhouse Rock. It's like, this is not that. This is not that. So, if this plan to expand the court goes ahead, how does it not undermine whatever trust is left in this institution? How does it not just then become an all-out arms race where every time a chamber flips, they're trying to add or take away more justices?
Yeah, obviously that is a real possibility, and I think we should be candid about it, that this could be the beginning of the end of the court as it stands today, as this body full of wizards that basically sits as a super legislature and gets to decide what Congress and states can and cannot do. But, I think there's also a future in which the far right loses its grasp on the Republican Party. The Republican Party becomes a genuinely multiracial coalition. It drops its extreme hostility to voting rights and democratic norms, and perhaps both sides come together and shake hands and say, okay, Republicans did this, Democrats did that, and now we're calling a truce. I do think that's possible. But I think the more likely outcome is delegitimization, and I think that we need to listen to really smart people like Jamelle Bouie, my former colleague now at the New York Times, who says that could be a good thing. There is a silver lining there, because the Constitution arguably does not actually give the Supreme Court the power to do everything that it does, right? Like, it's
they
pretty...
took the power themselves. I remember Marbury versus Madison.
Exactly.
I remember that.
A deeply partisan case, by the way. But, in Marbury, the court said, okay, well, we've just decided that we have this power of judicial review, and so we're going to use it all the time forever. And that is not necessarily spelled out in the Constitution, and I think that what's happened, especially over the last few decades, is that as Congress becomes more gridlocked, as Congress loses its ability to do anything, the Supreme Court has stepped in, and it has really filled in the gaps. And it has made a lot of policy decisions for this country. And it has kind of taken the burden off of Congress to do a lot of lawmaking. And so what people like Jamelle argue, and I think there's a lot of validity to this, is that if the court is delegitimized, it will return constitutional decision-making to the democratic branches, and that is a good thing. The people who are making these incredibly important decisions should be accountable to the people. They should be elected by the people. They should be part of a more transparent and representative body. They should not be wizards and rogues. They should be politicians, because that is really what the Constitution envisions, and it is just not the country that we're living in today.
This episode of Everything You Think You Know About SCOTUS is Wrong brought to you by Mark Joseph Stone.
Thank you, sir.
Always a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Coming up, we'll talk about all that money progressives raised after RBG died and see if it actually does anything at all. You're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR.
You're listening to It's Been a Minute on Michigan Radio. Tonight on Ask Me Another, Queer Eye interior design expert Bobby Burke joins the show talking about inspiring happiness through design, like that little burst of joy you get after rearranging your furniture. Ask Me Another is coming up tonight at 8.
Every relationship has its own obstacles. Every person you come into your life to has been sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. On the next Snapjacket, an Ear Hustle special, Hold That Space. Snapjacket, do not miss it.
That's coming up at 9 right here on Michigan Radio. Michigan Radio weather tomorrow, mostly cloudy in west and mid-Michigan with a slight chance of showers in the afternoon. In southeast Michigan, partly sunny skies, highs from the mid to upper 70s.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from LifeLock, reminding consumers that millions of Americans have been affected by identity theft. Learn more at lifelock.com/NPR. From the Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide to address inequality in all its forms. Learn more at fordfoundation.org. And from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, helping NPR advance journalistic excellence in the digital age.
You're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Sam Sanders. All right, you've probably seen by now those staggering fundraising numbers in the aftermath of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death. Democrats and progressives across the country, they gave more than $100